Have you ever wondered what happens on an Amish farm the morning after the draft horse dies when the animal that plows every field, pulls every load, and powers every operation on the property is gone? And there is no tractor to call, no equipment rental to arrange, and no backup plan that does not involve the community? The horse is not a machine. To understand what the loss of a horse means to an Amish farmer, you have to understand what the horse is, not in the emotional sense, but in the operational one. The draft horse is the engine of the Amish farm. It plows the fields, it pulls the planter and the cultivator and the hay rake and the grain binder. It hauls the loaded wagon from the field to the barn. It pulls the family buggy to church and to market and to the neighbor's property. A typical Amish farm runs 5 draft horses not because the farmer wants 5 horses, but because 5 horses are what the farm requires to operate across the full range of its seasonal work. When one of those horses dies, the farm does not slow down. It stops. The work that horse was doing cannot be done by the remaining animals without reducing the pace of everything else simultaneously. There is no tractor to substitute. The ordnung that governs the community's life forbids field work with tractors, and that is not a rule that bends because a horse died. The first morning without the horse. The morning after a draft horse dies on an Amish farm, the farmer wakes at the same time he always wakes before sunrise and goes through the same routine of morning chores. But the barn has one fewer animal in it, and the day's work plan has a gap in it that cannot be filled by goodwill or effort alone. If the horse died during planting season, the fields that were scheduled to be worked that day will not be worked. Planting has a narrow window. Corn planted 2 weeks late produces a measurably smaller yield. Hay that is not cut when it reaches peak nutrition loses quality every day it stands in the field. The Amish farmer knows this. He has known it his entire life. He also knows that the next step is not to call a dealer or log on to a livestock website. The next step is to walk across the road or send a child down the lane and tell the neighbor what has happened. Because in an Amish community, the loss of a working horse is not a private financial problem. It is a community event that triggers a community response. The community response. Within hours of the news spreading through the church district, and news spreads quickly in a community where visiting is the primary social activity, and where every family knows every other family's situation. Neighbors begin arriving. This is not organized. There is no phone tree, no committee, no formal notification system. It is the spontaneous expression of a community whose members understand, without being asked, what a farmer without a working horse needs. The most immediate need is labor, the field work that cannot wait. A neighbor with a spare horse or a team that is not needed that day for his own fields brings the animal and puts it to work on the affected farm. This is not a transaction. No money changes hands. No payment is arranged or expected. The horse is lent because the neighbor has it and the farmer needs it, and the community's values make the connection between those two facts automatic. The second need is time, because finding a replacement horse takes days or weeks, and the farm's work cannot wait that long. The community bridges that gap. What replacing a draft horse actually costs. The practical financial dimension of losing a draft horse is significant and should not be minimized. A well-trained draft horse, the kind that an Amish farm requires for the full range of field work, the kind that is accustomed to working in a team, responsive to the driver's commands, and experienced enough to manage the unpredictable situations that farm work produces, costs between $3,000 and $8,000 in today's market, depending on the animal's age, training level, and breed. A young, unstarted animal can be purchased for considerably less, sometimes under $1,000, but an unstarted horse cannot be put to work immediately. It requires months of training before it can function reliably in harness alongside an experienced team. An Amish farm that loses its primary working horse during planting season does not have months to wait for a young animal to mature into usefulness. It needs a trained replacement quickly at a price that represents a significant household expenditure. The community's mutual aid system addresses this through the same mechanisms it applies to medical bills and disaster recovery: the church alms fund, the deacon's assessment of the household's need, and the community's collective resources deployed toward a member's specific crisis. The role of the church district. The church district, the group of 25 to 35 families who worship together, whose farms are geographically proximate, and who function as each other's primary mutual aid network, is the institutional structure through which the response to a horse loss is organized and sustained. The deacon, who manages the congregation's financial affairs and maintains direct personal knowledge of every family's circumstances, assesses the situation. If the family can absorb the cost of a replacement horse through their own savings, the community's role is limited to the practical labor assistance and the temporary lending of animals described above. If the family cannot afford a replacement, if the horse loss comes at the end of a difficult season, or the farm is young and cash reserves are limited, or the family has recently faced other unexpected expenses, the church alms fund provides. Members of the congregation have contributed 10% of their annual income to this fund. The deacon distributes it according to need, without application forms, without eligibility criteria, and without the bureaucratic process that characterizes every external financial assistance program available to the broader agricultural community. The decision is made by a person who knows the family, knows their land, knows their animals, and knows what they need. It is made quickly. The replacement horse appears on the property within days. What happens during planting season? The timing of a horse loss matters enormously in the Amish agricultural calendar, and no timing is worse than the weeks between late April and early June, when the planting season demands continuous fieldwork without pause. Corn planting in the Midwest and Mid-Atlantic states has a specific optimal window, approximately 3 weeks, during which soil temperature and moisture conditions are right and in which late-planted corn will face a shortened growing season and reduced yield at harvest. An Amish farm that loses its primary draft horse on the first day of planting season faces a genuine crisis that the community recognizes and responds to with corresponding urgency. Neighbors who have completed their own planting, or who can spare a horse for a day without disrupting their own schedule, bring animals to the affected farm. Work is done by multiple people simultaneously, a neighbor's horse pulling the planter through one field while the farmer's remaining team works another. The community's collective response compresses what would otherwise be a 2-week delay into a manageable interruption. The fields get planted, the window does not close, the season is recovered. This is the barter economy at its most operationally critical, the community's labor and animals deployed in direct response to one farm's inability to function, without any payment, any contract, or any formal obligation beyond the community's shared understanding of what membership requires. Difference between a buggy horse and a draft horse. Not all Amish horses are the same, and a loss that affects the farm's field operations is a different kind of crisis than a loss that affects the family's transportation. The draft horse, the Belgian, the Percheron, the Clydesdale, the heavy animal bred for pulling weight, is the farm's engine. It works the fields, hauls the loads, and powers the agricultural operations that produce the farm's income. The buggy horse, typically a lighter, faster standard-bred or a crossbred animal with more endurance for road travel, is the family's transportation system. It pulls the family to church, to market, to the neighbor's property, and to every other destination the family needs to reach in the ordinary course of life. Losing a draft horse stops the farm. Losing a buggy horse stops the family's movement. Both losses are serious. Both trigger community response, but they trigger different kinds of response because the needs they create are different. A family without a buggy horse can borrow one for Sunday church from a neighbor whose animal is available that day. A farm without a draft horse during field season cannot borrow its way through 2 weeks of intensive field work on the charity of neighbors it needs a replacement animal functioning in harness within days, and the community's response to that need is correspondingly more organized and more urgent. What the horse means beyond the farm. The draft horse in an Amish community is not simply an agricultural tool that can be evaluated in terms of its replacement cost and its productive capacity. It occupies a specific position in the community's relationship with technology, with community structure, and with the theological principles that the Ordnung is designed to protect. The Amish use of horses in field operations rather than tractors, which most Amish communities permit to power stationary equipment but not to work land, is not a practical preference. It is a deliberate, theological, and social choice. As one Amish farmer explained in a documented interview with Organic Valley, the horse limits the number of acres a person can farm. And limiting farm size is what produces community. Instead of one farmer farming 1,000 acres, the horse creates 10 farmers farming 100 acres each. The horse is not just the engine of the individual farm, it is the mechanism through which the community's agricultural structure is maintained at the human scale that allows community itself to exist. A tractor that could replace the draft horse would also replace 9 of the 10 farmers, concentrating land, eliminating families, and destroying the community density that the Amish understand as essential to everything else their way of life produces. The loss of a horse is therefore always, at some level, more than a financial event. It is a reminder of why the horse exists in the first place, and why the community's response to its loss is as automatic as it is. The horse the community provides. The replacement horse that arrives on an Amish farm after a loss comes through one of several channels, and each channel reflects a different aspect of the community's economic structure. The simplest and fastest channel is a direct transfer from another community member who has a surplus animal, a farmer who bred a horse the previous year and has a trained young animal ready to work, or a family whose farm situation has changed and who no longer needs one of their team. These transfers happen within the community at prices negotiated between people who know each other and who are not operating in a commercial market context. The price reflects the community's internal economy fair to both parties, influenced by the buyer's circumstances, and not determined by the external market for draft horses that non-Amish buyers face. The second channel is the community auction, or the collective purchase, when the church district organizes a group effort to source a replacement animal from outside the community, using church alms funds to cover the cost. The third channel is the waiting period, when the farmer borrows animals from neighbors while saving for his own replacement, managing his operation at reduced capacity with the community's practical assistance, making that reduced capacity functional enough to survive the season. What is consistent across all three channels is the absence of the farmer facing this problem alone. The community that surrounds him knew his horse, it knew his farm, it knows what he needs, and it moves toward that need without waiting to be asked. The question posed in the title of this video, what happens when an Amish farmer loses his horse, has a simple surface answer and a much deeper real one. The surface answer is that neighbors come with their own horses. The church deacon assesses the household's financial need. The alms fund covers the replacement cost if necessary, and the farm continues operating through the combined labor and animals of the surrounding community until a permanent replacement is in place. The deeper answer is that the entire response described in this video is only possible because of decisions the community made long before the horse died. The decision to use horses rather than tractors, which keeps farms small and farming families numerous and close together. The decision to organize community life around the church district, which ensures that the farmer's neighbors are also his fellow worshipers, people he has eaten with and worked with and prayed with across years of shared community life. The decision to maintain a church alms fund, which ensures that financial need, when it arises, can be met by community resources without application to any outside institution. The decision to practice mutual aid as a theological commitment rather than a voluntary charitable act, which ensures that the response to need is not dependent on any individual's generosity on any particular day. The horse that died was one animal on one farm. The response to its death was the entire community demonstrating, in the most practical possible way, why it was built the way it was built and why it works.